So I think we're good to go for James Hughes. James is the Executive Director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. He and Nick Bostrom founded that a couple of years ago. They're bringing together a number of fellows across a wide spectrum of areas that related to emerging technologies. And you can probably talk a little bit more about that, the work that they're doing. James is another close friend. He's quite a speaker, quite a fascinating guy. Take it away, James.
Thank you, Tyler. It's been a great conference. I try to keep Zen mind about these things so that if only 5 people show up, I don't get disappointed. But this has been great, not only in terms of the numbers, but also the quality and diversity. I want to thank the organizers for organizing it. My background is bioethics, politics, public policy, that kind of stuff. Apparently some of you hate that, I just heard. I'm going to talk to that, and I may sound a little bit like Darth Vader, but then we can have discussion afterwards. My goal in the last couple of years of my work with the transhumanist community and what we call the techno-progressive community, kind of lefty transhumanists or people like that, is to try to build a bridge, a public policy bridge, to mainstream public policy concerns so that we can come in from the cold, from the futurist fringes, and begin to actually have an impact in public policy. And that's what I'm going to address my comments to today. By the way, this is the opening slide here has Bender saying "Hasta la vista, meatbag," and I chose that because I thought that was like the dystopian version of the Singularity, and then this AI is the very nice little kid from AI, and he's the utopian. But then I realized, well, what's the end of AI? It's where there's no more humans and it's all robots. And the Bender universe is one where robots can be really awful, like Bender, but there's a mix of humans and robots. So I don't know. There's probably some lesson there that I came up with that. Let's explore that later. My assumptions for the talk are, first, that AGI is likely. I probably started to believe this when I was 12, and I'm no super genius, and I haven't come up with any super-duper calculations about accelerating change to validate it. I just believe it. I think many of us believe it for not entirely rational reasons, but one of the reasons that I at least attribute post facto to rationalize it is that I see greater than human intelligence around me every single day. I'm a sociologist. And we sociologists look at organizations as examples of greater than human intelligence, as organizations of information that have memory, that have intent, that have metacognition, that create boundaries, that reproduce themselves, that marry, that have affairs, that divide and mutate. Organizations actually are meta-human intelligence of one sort or another. They may be, squalling baby-level intelligence. They may be cockroach-level intelligence. They may not be what we're talking about with AGI, but they are a form of meta-level intelligence. I think that perspective has shaped the way that I approach some of these questions. It's a theory of complexity kind of perspective. Actually, I just met Peter Russell for the very first time. He wrote a book back in the 1980s called The Global Brain, which was very influential with me, and argued that the globe, all of us communicating through some kind of as yet not created information architecture, would create a kind of meta brain in which each of us were a neuron in that meta process. Werner Vinge says in his classic Singularity essay that we need to look in network and interface research that there is something as profound and potentially wild as artificial intelligence in the human computer to human communication networks that we've built. You can see this in Greg Stock's MetaMan book and John Smart's work on this topic. So, when we began to have something like Google, which is something that I rely on all the time to augment my own intelligence, but which is actually the collective summation of billions of people's collective intelligence put through computer algorithms and then fed back into each of our brains, that begins to suggest to me that we may not be entirely correct to be looking for a designed intelligence, as Steve Jurvetson was saying, a designed intelligence in a box someplace that somebody's going to come up with. Now, I also have the assumption that AGI is probably very dangerous. You may know this robot over here from Battlestar Galactica, very, very dangerous robot. And then the Colossus, one of the classic robots, the supercomputers that wakes up and takes over the world, decides that it knows better than we do how to run our world, an idea that I'm not entirely happy with. I believe robots can be very, very dangerous, both because they might be able to magnify the malicious and stupid intents of the humans who designed them and who might control them, but also because if they were in fact self-willed, that those self-willed intents that they might develop might be contrary to our own. And I think on those first two principles, that AGI is possible and that it's dangerous, I agree with most of the people who would call themselves singularitarians. I think where we begin to diverge is the notion that AGI is going to be radically alien. And I say this partly because the only pets that my family has ever owned are a gecko and a cat. We adopted a gecko about 10 years ago, and I have never, in those entire 10 years, ever felt like I actually had any kind of communication with that gecko. And when you put that gecko in your hand, I share 60% of my DNA with that gecko. You know, we feed it a couple times, every day. And you put it in your hand, and I could be a mountain to that gecko. I could be a tree that it's climbing up. I'm just a tree that happens to move around and jump around and pet it on the back. And if it's that impossible to establish empathy and communication with a neural architecture that I share, so much of the evolutionary tree with, then I think that there is a similar kind of gap between our ability to imagine that even if we attempt to reverse engineer the brain and put it in a box, that whatever comes out of that box is going to be something that's immediately going to recognize us and be, for instance, as Sam Adams said, even have our time sense. If you remember that classic Star Trek episode where there were people on a planet who zooped themselves up so that when they got on the Star Trek Enterprise, everyone was just standing around like a statue. And the people were walking around them, and what had happened to all the people on that planet? You couldn't even see the people because they were moving so fast. And I think our existence and the existence of AIs might be like that. They might try to communicate with us, and they might start by trying to communicate with the highest form of intelligence and collective organization that they see, which might be the New York Stock Exchange, or the bacterial colonies in our gut, or ant colonies in our backyard or something. They say, oh, I see intelligence out there, I'm going to start communicating with it. So I don't think that this is, I think that the Friendly AI project, which is embodied in the Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence, although it's beginning to, I'm very happy to see, branch out from that, I think it's a good project, but I think that the principal thing that we will learn from that project is how to make friendly human beings. I've written about this in Citizen Cyborg. That I believe it's not just a matter of people that robots with superintelligence should be friendly. I think human beings with superintelligence should also be friendly. And we need to start thinking about how we ensure that people with vast amounts of power are accountable and friendly and not sociopathic. And we may learn that from doing things like affective computing, from trying to reverse engineer the social and emotional parts of human brains in computers. And we may also learn things about human ethics. Wendell Wallach talked about utilitarianism and deontology, trying to code different ethical codes into computers. You may have heard that humans have some innate evolutionary psychology, moral intuitions, and we can test those. One of the tests for those is to say, okay, if you're a utilitarian, and most of us have a general utilitarian calculus, you see a train coming down the tracks, it's going to hit 5 kids. If you push a button, you can make it go onto another track where it's just going to hit 1 person, where you push the button. 90% of people say yes. I'd push the button, save 5 kids, let it hit 1 person. Then the second scenario is you're standing on a bridge above a train track. You're standing next to a very fat man. You look at the train, you see a train's going to hit 5 kids, you realize if you push the fat man on the tracks, his body will stop the train. Will you push the fat man on the track? 90% of people say no. Well, why is that? It's because we have this monkey brain intuition that it's not a good idea to push people onto railroad tracks. Maybe to push a button, but not to push people on directly. Well, it doesn't make any sense from a utilitarian point of view, and we do a lot of training with soldiers to overcome that monkey brain feeling so that they send their 5 comrades out to save the life of 50 other comrades. But, we could design a perfectly utilitarian computer, and we found actually humans who have brain damage that eliminates their moral compunction about pushing the guy over. You ask them, would you push the guy over? They say, absolutely, I'd push the guy over. They're perfect utilitarian thinkers. Okay, so you might want a perfect utilitarian thinker as one of your soldiers in the field, but I wouldn't want to stand next to him on a bridge. And I think that I wouldn't necessarily want a perfect utilitarian super AI out there. The same thing with the people who are purely deontological thinkers. I will never lie under any circumstances. Well, you've seen many examples in literature, and you've probably met some people who don't have that filter and who never tell a lie, and it's kind of annoying to be around. And the final problem with this attempt at friendly AI is that I believe motivations can drift. They can be edited. You may not be able to read this very well, but it says, "Welcome to my annual meet and greet, succulent fleshlings." And she says, "You promise not to kill anyone today. Oh, I swear on Wikipedia's entry for honor. This unit will be brought right back. I have to check on the potatoes." And then he goes and edits the Wikipedia entry for honor. So all of us, I think, have a certain difficulty now, but perhaps not in the future, editing our moral intuitions. Although some of the very interesting recent work has suggested that, for instance, liberals are responsive to certain moral intuitions, and we are able to ignore, we who are liberals, are able to ignore what the moral intuitions that many conservatives have about cleanliness and spiritual pollution and the importance of hierarchy and things like that. So we may already be overcoming our moral intuitions. And I think computers will be able to edit their moral intuitions as well. Now, a part of my critique is also of the singularitarian vision is also that because of my studies of religious and political history, I see an enormous amount, and everybody who looks at singularitarianism sees an enormous amount of millennialist impact on this movement. And I don't mean to disparage it, because I have a utopian side, I have a millennialist side, and when I get up on the wrong side of the bed, I have an apocalyptic side. And I find inspiration in all those different parts of my personality, my utopian and my millennial aspirations. I want to create a better world. I think a better world can be created. My apocalyptic concerns about the future of my children's life, about the future of all of our lives, motivate me to work for things like arms control. So I don't disparage the concerns, the millennialist impulse. What I think we need to be self-critical of is the way in which millennialist impulses create cognitive biases. And one of the ones that I see quite clearly in singularitarianism is a positive assumption that whatever comes out of all of this is going to be good. And then you press any singularitarian and they say, okay, now you also acknowledge that there's an apocalyptic possibility. Yes, there's an apocalyptic possibility, but we still need to go full speed ahead, right to the singularity. Okay, well, that doesn't sound consistent, right? What are we going to do? Oh, well, what we're going to do is make sure that it's friendly so that when it comes out of the box, it's going to be just like Jesus Christ descending with a host of angels and give us all, manna from heaven. Everyone's going to have a cell phone and everything else that they want. I don't think that I think that that's a millennialist cognitive bias, that your assumption is that because of the inevitability of the techno rapture of the nerds, that it's impossible that we're going to actually all get whacked by this thing. Okay, so the response that I also can get from that is atomic war is a real possibility. Is it apocalyptic to say that you're worried about atomic war? No, it's not apocalyptic. If you walk around all the time certain that atomic war is going to happen, that's a particular psycho-causation that's happened to you, because I don't think it's a realistic thing to walk around all the time certain that atomic war is going to happen. If you say, I am worried about atomic war, like I'm worried about bioterrorism or other kinds of existential threats, and I'm going to engage in these political actions and these public policy actions to try to reduce those risks, arms control, diplomacy, the creation of international policing structures, and so on, then that is not millennialist bias. That's serious engagement. You're not engaging in magical thinking that there's only 3 guys in their shorts in some AI computer lab who are going to solve all the world's problems. You're engaging in a collective kind of intelligence. Now, the connection between that idea and the public policy things I want to mention is the idea of emergent A life. I think emergent A life is far more dangerous, and connecting to Steve Jurvetson's idea, Steve is talking about the intentional evolutionary processes that might lead to AI. I'm worried about the evolutionary processes of A life loose in the information architecture of the world that might emerge and do, perhaps it'll never get as smart as a human being, perhaps it'll just be as smart as cockroaches, but cockroaches are extremely annoying. Rats are extremely annoying, right? Dogs and feral dogs are extremely annoying. So however intelligent they get, they could be extremely annoying. Bacteria aren't that intelligent, but they're extremely annoying. Now, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, you may have heard in recent news that there's a storm worm bot loose. These are some other examples that before this week, I'm going to talk about the stormworm, but China apparently unleashed a denial of service attack against Estonia. Russia rather. Chinese hackers have been accused of hacking into the Pentagon, and there's all kinds of cybersecurity concerns around the world. But something that happened just this week. Reportage says the stormworm botnet has colonized up to 2 million machines around the world from about 5,000 to 6,000 infected websites. The botnet has generated billions of messages, reached a peak on August 22, most recently, when 57 million virus-infected messages, 99% of them from the stormworm, were tracked crossing the internet. It's coded to detect IP addresses that run security scans on it and launch DOS attacks against them. So it communicates the identity of people who are trying to scan it for security to other members of the distributed network, other software, pieces of software, and they all launch a denial of service attack against it, also against anti-spam organizations that try to download it and individual researchers who have tried to download it. This is a quote from one of the security researchers. If a researcher is repeatedly trying to pull down the malware to examine it, the botnet knows you're a researcher and launches an attack against you. It's a new behavior for a botnet. It's acting in a defensive manner. It's a little scary, isn't it, he says. He's the director of University Cybersecurity Organization. Gunter Ullman, the director of security at IBM's Internet Security System, says, "This is the first time I've ever seen an automated response like this." Okay, so this is something that's happening this week. You know, we should be talking about this. This is people who are concerned about expert system behavior that are threatening the communication networks and economic networks of our world, and we should be talking about how do we communicate to them. We don't want to see a future in which, as Christine said, there's a top-down solution that comes up with something we don't like. So we need to get involved in this cybersecurity debate about the kind of future threats that we see. There are very few people who are doing that. This is one example that I found, but I didn't find very many. I looked around for anybody in cybersecurity, folks, who were talking about the potential future threats from expert systems or AI or anything like that. Very few people are talking about it. And it has to be global. It has to be national as well, and probably has to be local as well, but it has to be global. And another thing I didn't hear mentioned this weekend, was the 1996 Wassenaar Arrangement on Expert Controls for Conventional Arms and Dual-Use Goods and Technologies, an agreement of 40 different countries that was signed in 1996, which restricts trading in cryptographic software, expert systems, and supercomputers. Okay, now we don't like trading controls, we don't like export limitations. You know, China should be able to buy anything they want from the United States, even if they're a totalitarian nation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these are things that which are actually out there. There are international agreements and laws and regulations controlling dangerous software. And we need to be talking to those folks who are making those kinds of arrangements about what the future threats might be. On the flip side, there is a positive dimension to international cooperation. Jemay was challenged about this, and he gave the example of the Human Genome Project. And the Human Genome Project set aside 5% of its funding for ethical, legal, and social implications studies of genetic work. And the National Nanotechnology Initiative did the same. And we can imagine an international cooperation around AI that also that would fund conferences like this. You wouldn't even have to pay $50 to get in if you got that kind of funding. We could all be talking about these kinds of projects internationally. Now, one of the interesting conundrums, therefore, is that if we were to create an international police structure that tried to monitor for emergent or evolved or released AI expert systems in the information architecture of the world, committing cybercrime and so forth, they would probably also have to have AI as a part of their component, perhaps AI that's somehow tied to loyalty to human institutions in some way that the others are not. But you get into then that conundrum. Well, how powerful an AI would we be able to have? It's like, you know, okay, you've got a human soldier and he's going to use an elephant in the battlefield. Well, how well can that human soldier control an elephant in the battlefield? It may be that this is a huge conundrum, that we may not be able to have powerful enough security structures to detect and control the potential AI threats out there. So one of the things that I think is integral, and it's been integral from the beginning of this discussion, is human intelligence augmentation. It was in the original essay by Werner Vinge. He says there's AI and then there's IA, intelligence amplification, intelligence amplification. And intelligence amplification has these various advantages that, in fact, we know what human beings think like. We might be able to relate to them. Some of them are already friendly. Intelligence amplification would allow us to keep one step ahead, potentially one step ahead of this change. Now, I know that the singularitarians then roll their eyes back in their head and say, oh my God, you don't understand anything about accelerating change because the AIs are going to bootstrap themselves into godhood in 3.5 seconds and turn all of the planet into computronium. Well, okay, maybe. If so, then we have to talk about how to prevent that, because I don't think that's such a great solution. If not, one of the things that we might talk about is that keeping organic human origin brains as a part of the control mechanism for whatever information architectures we create, whatever artificial systems and expert systems we create, maybe that's a good idea. And maybe this lack of progress in creating AGI and substantial progress in creating limited, non-self-aware, non-sentient AI architectures that are able to do things that human beings decide really want done, maybe that's a good thing, right? Maybe it's a good thing that you don't have to have an argument with your toaster in the morning to convince it to give you bread because you're too fat. I don't think you need bread. You should be going low carb, I'm sorry. But what the singularitarians I often hear from them is, well, the code is pure. You know, the human beings have genetic algorithms that are running, and it gets, they're all selfish and things like that. The code is pure. And even Werner Vinci says a creature that was built de novo might possibly be a much more benign entity than one with a kernel based on fang and talon. Well, maybe you can come up with pure code, but maybe we can purify the humans as well, right? We're already figuring out what the roots of sociopathy and lack of empathy and violence tendencies and depression and things are in human beings. I see great promise in human augmentation of our moral ability. It's the focus of my next book, of course, and coming out in 2 years, I hope. Finally, I'm coming into a close. Structural unemployment, one of the things that we need to discuss. Of course, it's been expected for about 100 years, maybe 200 years, if you go back to Condorcet, 300 years, that robots and automation would eventually get rid of the necessity of drudgery and that all human beings would be able to live the life of the lotus eaters and upload ourselves into Second Life and just have a great time. But it's not yet happened, but there are beginning to be signs that there is structural unemployment being created in various economies where structural unemployment means that once you automate physical labor and then you automate intellectual labor, there's not a whole lot left for human beings to do, right? The argument of the economists has always been, well, once, it's creative destruction in the capitalist market, and the capitalist market will always create new jobs. Okay, well, what are those new jobs that human beings might do better than advanced AI and advanced robotics? I don't think there are very many that you can come up with. Maybe sex work, psychiatry, writing poetry, but you don't have a great economy if you have sex work, psychiatry, and writing poetry. That's not a real human economy. Marshall Brain estimates that we'll have 50% unemployment by 2050, but then the National Academy of Sciences just 2 weeks ago published a paper that argues that we'll have 60% unemployment as a result of automation by 2030. Okay? Now that's probably way too optimistic. And one of the reasons it's way too optimistic is, as you saw in AI, is that if that started to happen, you'd have humans rounding up robots and getting them to kill each other in big coliseums. But there are advantages to a life of leisure if we can distribute it, if we can renegotiate the contract around work and income, if people can all feel that they have a stake in a roboticized future, instead of just going to be screwed by the capitalist system who doesn't care that they're going to be left jobless in the street and that their kids aren't going to be able to go to college. We need to have a renegotiation of the contract around work and income and leisure in this society to prepare for a roboticized future. Now, we've already talked about robotic rights. I believe that robots, under certain specific conditions, should have rights. But we've also talked, I'm glad, about the question of if we shackle these robots with certain kinds of restrictions, shackle them to, for instance, always care about human interests before their own, is that really the model of how we respect other sentient minds that we want to be perpetuating? Because I'm arguing that we should be treating robot minds the same way we were treating human minds, and maybe we should then go around and force everybody who's a racist to go under mandatory re-education and not be a racist anymore. And you get into this question of thought police and thought and cognitive freedom and so forth. So I would recommend to you that you read Nick Bostrom's essay on the 10 principles for ethically creating artificial minds. He basically is recapitulating what we'll probably have to do for kids as well, once we have the control over the minds of our kids, that one of the preconditions, and I hope it's soon, but 12-year-old to 14-year-old, so it's almost too late for me. He argues, for instance, that you need to have a commitment to creating a flourishing mind. You can't just say, I'm going to create a mind that will get up to 120 IQ, but will be impossible for it to get past 120 IQ. At the same time, we need to have a general discussion about, well, is it okay for it to go to 120 million IQ? And perhaps not. So we have to have this discussion. What does it mean to have a flourishing mind? What does it mean to have an open mind, to have cognitive self-possession and ownership, and at the same time live in a society with limits? Okay, licensing superpowers, my last thought here. If you need to license a car, yourself to drive a car, prove that you're not a sociopath, prove you know what you're doing to drive a car, why not drive something that's as dangerous as a car, like some kind of advanced expert system? If we only think that governments should be able to own nukes, something as destructive and powerful as a nuke, then perhaps only governments should be able to own SIs, zero time, okay, I see that, SIs of a particular level. I'll just leave you that thought for discussion later, but I think that's an important idea. And that leads to the idea that perhaps there is some kind of technology that we need to talk about banning. Perhaps there are situations in which it is not, in fact, better to be dead than delay the singularity. And with that, I'll say I do believe a good singularity is possible. I'm looking forward to living in a roboticized future, a life of leisure, uploading into Second Life, but I think we need to work at it. Thank you very much.